So how did we get to where we're at here in farming, where we're having to supply pretty much everything the plant needs and inputs? Nature obviously doesn't function that way. And so something went wrong, right? Along the way, we figured out a lot of stuff technology-wise to raise a fair number of bushels on not super productive land, but it's to the expense of us having to supply all these inputs every year. So here's a thing that I think all of us can see from an above ground standpoint that really relates to how the soil food web functions below the ground. So when we first came to this country and we homesteaded, there was a lot of coyotes and foxes, obviously grizzly bears and wolves and the such. We killed off all these predators, right? Because they were killing our sheep or they provided danger to us personally. What happened after that? The gopher numbers increased, right? So we've got gophers now eating our crop. And the only way to control these gophers is to come up with some sort of a poison solution since we destroyed all these predators up here. On a side note, if you're just a farmer, or really even we ranch, and killing coyotes is a complete waste of resources and actually a backward solution to what we want to do on the farm unless you're having a huge number of losses on the calving side. I'm sure this is different in the Sweetgrass Hills where maybe there's big herds of coyotes or whatnot, but even on our ranching side of things, we probably could count on one hand the number of calves we've ever lost to a predator, and most of those were sick or already on their way out. So by killing off the coyotes, now the gopher numbers increase, and the only way to deal with the gopher number increase is for us to kill the gophers ourselves, right? So the remaining predators eat the poison gophers. So we still have coyotes and foxes. Now we're throwing out some strychnine there, and by trying to control the gophers, we've now wiped out the rest of our predators. We not only wiped out the coyotes and the foxes, we wiped out some hawks. Did probably impact the badgers pretty well, but the badgers obviously are the first to come back. And so now our only control option with the predators gone is poison, right? And so what happened after this first cycle took place is now the gophers come back in even greater numbers, which is what we're kind of seeing today. So we got to go out there with more poison, and this keeps amping up the amount of money we got to put in to sustain a system like this that should have stayed balanced just by the coyotes and the foxes helping control the gophers. What's the one predator that we still have left that we hate of these gophers is a badger, right? The more coyotes and foxes that come back, the less the badgers have gopher type varmints or whatever that will sustain their population, and they'll start to level out too. So how does that apply to the soil food web? So before we mess this up, anyways, we had soil feeding carbon and sugars into the ground that fed all of this life in the soil. So bacteria, fungi, protozoa, arthropods, nematodes, these higher level ones here are just like the coyotes and foxes. They would keep all this other stuff in check, and then we would cycle nutrients back in a form that the plant could use, right? So what's the first thing we did when we came in and we broke the sod out? And when we work that ground, the very first thing to go away is the fungal network. Every time we rip that apart, you're basically making that have to reset from where it was built up. And so that fungal network is our highway. That's the stuff that's transporting all of the water and nutrients and stuff around in the soil way beyond what the roots could access, right? So we wiped out the fungi. We broke the crop out. At least at this point, we were probably cropping it every year to something, and now this next invention came along where we started fallowing, right? And what happens when we fallow is that we take a whole year now and we eliminate any sugar from being deposited or any photosynthesis happening. Sugar's deposited in the ground and feeding this network. So when we quit feeding everything in the soil, then pretty soon, this network, it starts to starve, basically, right? And so as it starts to starve during that fallow year, all we have left that's really ramped up in the soil is stuff that breaks down dead material. So stuff that we really don't want anyways that causes things like dryland root rot or some root-fitting nematodes. All of this stuff's getting out of balance now, right? Because we've starved the soil for a whole year while we're fallowing it, trying to build water up. So what's the next thing we do? Because the soil food web is getting broken, and we've now eliminated the sugar source for a year. We've eliminated the fungi, and we come in now with anhydrous because the nitrogen cycle is broken, and we try and add nitrogen back in there, which worked, right, to ramp the yields back up. We put insecticides down because we have an overbalance of predatory bugs or things that aren't good for the crop. And then we put seed treat on because of the fungal problems and the bacterial load of stuff that's not good in the soil because we started breaking this cycle. Well, when we do all that, when we put anhydrous, insecticides, seed treats, and fungicides down, now we're wiping out the rest of the soil food web. We also affected the bees because now they're learning that neonics, like any of the wireworm treats you put on seed every year, which is hundreds of thousands of acres in our area, have these neonics applied. There's a big link to the colony collapse disorder thing in the bees too. So we've affected the birds, especially the predatory birds like the hawks, because as we poison these gophers and they eat some of this, you're obviously impacting their numbers as well, right? So we did all this without knowing. All we knew is we got good results from anhydrous, insecticides, seed treat, and fungicides because the web was broken and we had a disease problem and a nutrient problem. All of this would not have existed if we would have known better back then how to sustain the soil food web, but we didn't, right? So now we pretty well eliminated a good chunk of this cycle from the soil food web. So now we get into the problem of nature's always going to try and fill a void. The chem follow thing worked great for several years. At least we weren't disturbing the ground, although we applied a rather large amount of glyphosate, which is questionable how good that is, right? But now we can't kill things with glyphosate anymore. And so we go out there and throw paraquat on 1 or 2 passes a year on bare ground where there's no nutrient cycling happening, no sugars being fed into the ground. Our kochia is at least trying to cycle something back into the ground. And we, in order to control that, now have to apply paraquat. And the one thing that always survives in the soil pretty well, whether it's bare ground or what, is the bacterial load. And now this paraquat they're finding actually has a big impact on the bacteria as well. So as you can see how we got to where we are, where we have to apply inputs for everything that the crop needs, because all of the life that was helping us out before in there, we'd pretty well destroyed. And we did this because the cycle just kept continuing on itself, right? It wasn't our fault necessarily, we just didn't have any better options or understanding of what was happening there. So what we've found as we've started eliminating seed treats from our operation, where we've dropped our fertilizer rates, we're going to switch to a low salt, this alpine fertilizer, per Earth Smart seed treat on, is that we are starting to get soil irrigation back and stuff. But as we look at the soil under a microscope, all we still pretty much have is bacteria in here. And we still haven't really started ramping back up the numbers of these other critters, basically. So how are we going to go about fixing that, right? So now, because we wiped out all of this stuff, you're responsible for paying money to someone to provide all those inputs to that cycle, that most of which should have been for free. So the first thing we did on our farm, which to me is the number one thing that makes the most sense to start out with, is eliminate the fallow. Before you start eliminating the fallow, there's higher risk in not treating the seed and the such, because the soil biology balance is so far out of whack from the year that you starve that stuff that there's higher risk of disease, I think. So we eliminate the fallow. What does that do right away? It starts getting us a living root in the soil as long as possible every year as that ground is in production. And it feeds those sugars and carbons back in there to start ramping up the good bacteria that'll support the plant, right? So we've got the bacteria part back. We're actually at the top end of the bacterial counts in these what are called PLFA or biology tests in our soil. What we haven't got back very well yet are the fungi, protozoa, and all the other upper life forms in the soil. So we eliminate seed treat. That should allow the fungus to come back. What could be the worst thing you could do for the mycorrhizal fungi network is just keep hammering it with fungicides, right? The other thing is when we eliminate seed treat, we get those neonics out of there, which is the gaucho, macho, all the products that you use to control the wireworms. We eliminated those, which allows us to quit impacting the bee and the insect populations for the beneficial insects. So the other thing that comes back, what we found already just by eliminating the salts and the fungicides and the seed treat, is we're getting earthworms back, cycling and creating some pore space in that soil, helping us water infiltration that we didn't have before. So these are the things we're seeing already with just a few years out in eliminating some of these inputs. And then we quit impacting the birds too. The other cool thing about having crop growing all the time is the gophers don't survive as well where they're standing material, right? Like they can't hide if they can be seen easier from the predators. And so if you notice, when you have chem follow, the gophers always like to move over into those bare spots and actually start digging holes. It's because they can see out in there. And there's a bunch of science to back this up. But basically, if you have a standing crop, the gopher population actually starts to go down, not up. So eliminating that fallow is also going to help impact that gopher population where we're not poisoning things, which is going to affect the upper ends of the cycles, like with the birds and everything else, and the coyotes and foxes, right? So we've got this far. We do diverse cropping, we quit fallowing, we quit treating. We were still doing loads of fertilizer through the drill, a decent load of salt-based fertilizer where we're going to switch away from that, which should help our mycorrhizal fungi network and the earthworms and the such. But we're still stuck where we're actually, now my sister got trained here to do biology under a microscope and look at what's in all these soils. So if you guys want soil test done and you want a video or a analysis done of what's in your soil, we'll actually have the capability to process that through our office here and send results back to you, and then you can actually just talk directly to my sister Darcy about what she sees in your ground and where we can go with that. So in our ground, we still don't have much of anything but bacteria. Like, we find very little of these protozoa, which are important for cycling the bacteria and keeping them in check. The nematodes are the same sort of thing. Those are all just the upper level life forms like the coyotes and foxes, right? And the mycorrhizal fungi is the most important thing we need to get back here. So how are we going to fix that? So we're going to apply biology back to the soil with compost tea and biological products. That Earth Smart seed treat's a great way to at least apply some things that support biology in the soil that replaces putting fungicide down. Low salt fertilizers are a good fit here. There's products like that Defender Max through Earth Smart that is biological. You can apply to the leaves that keep good biology on the leaf that doesn't let the bad stuff get in there. We're going to also do this with compost tea on our own farm. And so we'll provide some videos throughout the year showing you guys how the compost tea stuff's going, but we're creating our own compost. We might buy some compost sourced and then extract that and just shoot that through the drill, which is something we can do pretty cheaply. And the cool thing with the compost tea extract that's fresh is that you're putting live biology down in the ground. So we're getting these protozoa, the fungi, the arthropods, and everything will be in the solution that we're going to squirt down with the drill. So point being, I think we're just shifting our focus away from trying to kill everything to try and bring life back to everything so we don't have to pay so much money to sustain this all the time. So I hope this makes sense to you guys. This is the direction our farm's going, and I'll provide some more updates as we get farther down the line.